Hey everybody, welcome back. This is our episode on called Building a Bridge. We are about 5 lessons in on my book, Tune Fit. We've been working through this. I wrote this as I transitioned into a master's athlete. It's now helping me recover from prostate cancer. It's stuff I wish I had known when I was in my 20s, and I'm putting it together in a book that you can order. The link is on Amazon, and the lessons are free on YouTube. We also put together a logbook if you're interested. This helps you log your progress. So again, you don't have to use this, but if you want, it'll be there for you. What we're going to do this time is talking about the bridge from where you want to be and where you are. We talked about setting goals and smart goal setting, but what we want to do is really think about a bridge. You have to know where you are and you have to know where you're going in order to get there. In my book, I mentioned a story about my daughter. She became an elite racer in the criterium and road and bicycle, road bikes. And I'm not going to go through that whole story. I get emotional each time that I talk about it. But she went from literally trying every athletic organization you could think of. But when she was born, her foot was crooked. It came in. And so we had to put her on a brace to straighten her leg. So as she would do any sports where she would run, her foot would curl in. And then she would trip. And so, a lot of people were like, she just isn't meant for athletes or athletics. And she never gave up. And that was a motivation to me, is to never give up, keep trying. And when she got on a bike, your feet clip in. And it's a little bit like when you see a fish out of water and it's gasping for air. As soon as it gets in water, it knows what to do. That was my daughter. When she got on that bike, everything clicked. All the years of failed sports, she just realized those are things that she couldn't do, and she kept going until she found what she could. And that's what I'm talking about, building a bridge, is knowing where you're at and knowing where you're going doesn't always happen on the first go. But come up with an idea of a form. What do you want to look like? I used to look for pictures. This is the shape that I want to be. What about function? Function is, do I want to stand up or sit down, or when I fall, can I get up or go up a flight of steps or run a 5K or do a half marathon or lift heavy weights, or you fill in the blank. What function do you want your body to be able to do? So there's the form, the shape, what do you want to look like? There's the function, what do you want to do? And then there's your health. I have people say, I want to get my blood pressure down. I want to get my cholesterol right. I want to work on my pulse. I've been working on a cold, so I was a little delayed here, so I'll try to make it through here without coughing. But think about those. That's what we're talking about, building a bridge. In order to go from where you are to where you're going, you have to be able to strip off the bias and say, where am I? And then have a clear picture of where you're going. Whether it be I would put pictures up of weightlifting competitions that I wanted to do. And as soon as I bought that entry fee, boy, the clock ticked. It all of a sudden goes from I'm going to do that. I just paid money. You have to figure out what's a motivation for you. But you're going to build a bridge. And as I've learned and put the material together, is how you think, how you eat, how you act. It all focuses you into where you want to go. So it's like if you're getting ready to go on a trip, anymore we enter it into our phone. I used to have, my wife used to be the navigator, and we would know where we were going to go and where we started. Of course, there's detours and there's sites you'd like to see, but you kind of know the beginning and ending points. But when we come to our health, we're like, well, I'll just do whatever. Well, no wonder we're a mess, or I was a mess. I never really took it into practice that I am what I eat, I am what I do, I am what I think. The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. The Bible's pretty right. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. That's also pretty smart. So let's take a few minutes here to talk about this bridge. Your mind plays an awfully important part of the form, the function, and your health. Where are you now? Define that clearly. And we're going to give you some examples, and I'll show you some examples. I know when I was getting started, I didn't like to look at myself in the mirror. I didn't like pictures of myself. I certainly didn't like to get on the scales. And my clothes kept getting bigger and bigger. So I kind of stopped looking. You don't run right off the road if you don't look. So figure out how to get an accurate assessment of where you are, and then where are you going? What do you want to go? that's where your accountability team can come in. You know, if you're a donkey wanting to be a thoroughbred, you probably need to tell that donkey you're probably not ready for that. But maybe there's a tractor pull competition that you'd be really good at. You know, if you're 4'10" and you want to be an NBA center, probably someone needs to say, you know, that's maybe not the best goal. That doesn't mean you can't have fun playing basketball. So that's my point is, get realistic goals of where you're at and where you want to go, and then we'll understand the gap. Now, my background is process control, and I don't mean to geek out on this, but it's taken me a little while to realize there's a control loop here that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. So as you have this image in your mind and you start filling it with knowledge, books, information, then your body, if you think of your body as like a machine, you know, it's got rest that it needs, it has activity that it needs, it has medicine, you know, and then there's genetics or limitations. You know, if you have a limb that's missing, you can't do as much as if you don't, or if you have a broken knee or whatever, you have to consider those limitations. Like my daughter's foot was curled in. She came up with a sport that forced it to be right, and then she won the state crit. It doesn't mean you stop. That means you adapt and you adjust. So you think of your body as a machine. You know, you wouldn't put diesel in a car that needs petrol. You know, it just wouldn't work. Same thing with our body. You know, what are we feeding our body in terms of activity, machine, lubrication, you know, your joints, muscles, tendons? What are you doing? So we talked a little bit about definitions in the last couple chapters. Now we're starting to put it together. And then the nutrition is the fuel. What do you put into yourself? You know, we talked about macros and to proteins, fats, carbs. And in the next video, we will talk about how you read food. It's not just enough to say I'm eating whatever. You've got to start looking at the fuel source. Hydration, we'll talk about that. That's one thing I've been dealing with a lot lately, is I've been drinking enough and I start cramping. So being aware of yourself and what your body's telling you and through its signs. Someone said, if you listen to your body whisper, you don't have to hear it scream. That bears repeating. If you learn to listen to your body when it whisper, meaning something's not right. You know, there's something's not right. Listen to that. Don't just plow through it, because if you do, you may get to hear your body scream. And hearing your body scream is no fun. So vitamins, essential oils, amino acids, minerals, those are things we'll get into a little bit later on. I look at it as get the food distribution right, and then start working yourself into the higher. As you peel off layers, you can get more detailed. But once you have action in terms of activity for the body, medicine for the body, and then new fuel for the nutrition, as you start getting a clear picture of where you are and where you want to be, then you can close the difference and start moving in the direction. So you engage your brain through knowledge. Is what I'm doing helping me reach my goal? Does that bowl of ice cream at night really help you get your abs? Probably not. So maybe you should make an adjustment. You know, when you start thinking and engaging and don't just sort of meander along, all of a sudden the difference between where you are and where you want to be starts to shrink. And that's what's exciting and that's what's fun. But there has to be a feedback mechanism. What do I mean by feedback? You have to be able to measure your body. You have to be able to have a measurement. That's why the smart watches are kind of cool, is they can tell you your blood pressure, your heart rate, your activity, steps walked. Those are great. But a friend of mine was recording their nutrition in a log, and they're like, all this thing does is tells me my macros. I don't know what to do with that. So I'm still fat, I'm still out of shape, but I know exactly what my distribution is. It's not enough just to know. You have to take that knowledge and take action on that. So what you're going to see is, as you take measurements, as you're aware of what you're doing to yourself, you will start to move in the direction of your goal. If you don't, then you're either not taking the right measurement or you're not taking the right steps. It's that simple. Your nutrition, your activity, and your goals will align, and you'll get what you need to get as long as it's within reason. To me, we are what we eat, we are what we do, we are what we think. Once you get that lined up, you're good. So what I'm trying to get to you here is to get an accurate picture of your form, your function, and your health. And that's what these next few pages are basically talking about. In terms of physical measurements, things that you can measure, your weight, you can get on the scale. You can measure your blood pressure, your pulse rate, your body composition. You can measure your lab work. If you go to you get blood drawn to see physical capability, physical limitations. Those are things that I want you, that's the action for this week or this period, is to really write these down. In the back of this book, I have all kinds of forms you can use. But I started off just finding these on the internet. Find them on the internet. There's a picture of a body. I don't know if you can see that. And then you can take a measurement with and I'll show you some of those as we. Your functional measurements have to do with your duration. If you want to run a mile, but you can only run 10 feet, okay, now I know where I'm at. How do I get up there? Intensity has to do with your workout intensity. I've seen people, they just sort of float through a workout and don't see any results. Well, you need to look at intensity, duration, and frequency. How often are you do it? I have a tendency to over work out and then I crash. I learned that the hard way when I hurt my pec. After the surgery, I was feeling good. I was working out. My strength was coming up and my body broke. I didn't listen and I broke and I'm still recovering. That hurts. You don't want to hear your body scream, but I wasn't allowing myself rest. So I had my duration, my intensity, my frequency, and then I forgot I'm a machine that needs rest. You have to pay attention, make an adjustment, keep going. Mood, energy, what are you taking for medication? When I started losing weight, I became over-medicated, and with the blood pressure, and I would pass out. And I'm like, doctor, something's wrong. I'm like, well, shoot, you lost 25 pounds. So keep all those things in mind. Physical, and so you have to have inputs. If you could figure out how to see that what you're eating is this going to get you to your goal. And I'll show you after next week how I do that for people. So I put little smiley faces next to, well, you're doing these good, these are kind of bad. So let's make some adjustments. Remember, it's a process. And then your physical activity, a lot of times I'll work out with people and form, they're not right, or they're not doing the intensity, or they're doing too much of one and not the other. So you have to balance that. But it requires knowing where you're going. Now, what I don't want you to do is be like this ostrich and put your head in the sand and just hope. If you want to blindly follow a program, there's lots of programs you can find on the internet. I actually get that all the time. What program or what should I eat? And that's why I said early on, make yourself a time, 3 days a week, put it on your calendar that you wake up and invest in yourself. That may be studying, that may be thinking, that may be, doing jumping jacks, doing 5 minutes a day. When that becomes easy, do 7 and then 10, and eventually you make it part of your life. But if you don't pay attention, you will never get the results and you'll get discouraged. So that's what I want you to avoid. And this one is to anchor yourself. Where are you in terms of measurement? So I'm going to go through these real quick as some of the measurements that I've used. There's others, but your scale, these skin tests, as actually a blood pressure cuff, the tape measure, the mirror. Believe it or not looking at yourself, how is a problem. I'd have all the mirrors set so I couldn't see. So how you look at yourself, selfies, those could be very helpful. For example, you can't look at your back. Have you ever noticed you can't see your head's in the way? So if you take a picture of your back, somehow I have found that when you take pictures of yourself from the front, side, and back, and then lay it out, it can be astonishing because, folks, that's what everybody else sees. In your mind, you have a vision of what people see. When you take a picture, that's it. And a video is even better. And so on my YouTube page, I have my goal was to do a 360. So when I was pretty heavy, I would put the camera up, do a 360. And then every month I would I would twirl. And my goal was to stitch all those together in a video that would show me spinning to thin. So that was one of my goals, and I did it. And you can see that, look back through some of the early ones. So, and then clothes size, those are all things you can use. I do, again, emphasize that you don't start off blindly. Get a physical, get lab work, get some actual standards for your health, your age, your gender, all that kind of stuff. That's so important. You know, find a coach, find a trainer, find somebody, and don't get burned out there. So I went through 3 trainers before. I learned from each one until I found one that would work with me. You know, we'll spend a lot of money on pizzas and we won't spend, you know, $50 a month on a coach or whatever it is. Find somebody that has your best interests in mind. So I talk about Steve a lot. He was such a big help to me to put this together. On the back of this book here, I've got a picture of him. Him and I working together is, you know, he took me under his wing and shared and let me ask tons of questions. And because of that, this book was written. Now, let's get into it. When I'd go to get my physical, there's a thing called the BMI, or the body mass index. I used to tell my doctor, I'm going to take this home and rescale it. Because what it does is it takes a look at your height and your weight, and then wherever your height is and your weight is, you'll either be underweight, normal, overweight, obese, or critically obese. I was always in these red zones, and I said, well, I'm just not tall enough. You know, that's the problem. Is if I was taller, I would. My doctor never did laugh at that. And so this is something you can do: is take your body weight in kilograms and divide it by your height in meters. And I have an example here on how you can do that. And then these are the limits or the ranges that you'll see. Is you'll have your underweight at less than 18, 18 and a half, 25, or higher than 30. It's a number. And then you'll sometimes see charts that look like this, where there's for guys and girls. There's one for each. I think it's a good indicator. You know, and even the notes will say there's a lot of issues with. It's useful as a simple tool to screen for potential weight-related health problems. It doesn't do well to distinguish between muscle and fat. So as you get more lean, it doesn't do so good. It's not accurate for athletes, people with certain medical conditions, or children. It does not take into account body composition or fat distribution. So what you're going to find here is all of these have a little asterisk next to them, but they're indicators. So I like to have an indicator that people use, and then I'll show you my trends here in a minute. Body composition, what you're going to see, and we'll talk about this a lot, is fat and muscle. A pound of fat and a pound of muscle both weigh a pound. But if you put them on a scale, and it's kind of gross, is you can look at certain fat takes up, you know, significant 15 to 20% more space than muscle. So as you start to adjust your diet away from fat and add protein, you can actually eat more healthy stuff, less fat. That's one thing that people notice is I'm eating all the time and I'm losing weight. Well, that's because fat and muscle take up different space. Remember, fat has got over 2.5 times the energy capacity as protein and carbs. So your body stores that as a great energy source, but it actually fills up all over you. So the volume of fat takes up more. So as you start moving towards a leaner body, you can eat more and your body weight will shift. And so this is what I've got a picture here. Come on. That shows, you know, when I was starting on the left and when I was in one of my best shows, I was down in Texas, and a guy snapped a picture from the side. I still like that. I can't believe this. It's like I had a uniform on, but took a lot of work to get there. But you can see your percent, and this is where you see people read body fat percentages. You know, where I would try to compete at around 6.5 to 7%. That's what I was there. And on the left, I was probably at 15 to 20%. So you can see from 20% to 6%, my body composition changed. Is that your goal? Well, then you need to be able to measure your body fat. One way is if you pinch the back of your hand, that's about the leanest part of your body. And then you pinch my belly. It's and the ratio is kind of your percent body fat. So as your fat shrinks, it converges on this thin pinch. That's kind of the idea, but they make calipers to identify that. Now, I want to put a quick note in here, as I've had a couple people that I worked with that kind of went obsessive on this stuff, and they would measure every minute, you know, measure weight every day or twice a day, and be careful. You know, your body doesn't change overnight. You know, literally, once I started to measure my food and my activity, I stopped weighing myself because I knew what my weight was going to be. You can actually get to a point where when you're clued into your activities, your intensity, your workouts, your food, your nutrients, you know that the next reading will be fine. You don't have to wake up surprised. That's the issue. Now, when you wake up every day, like if you have a high salt meal, you're going to retain water and you're going to gain weight. And so people freak out and then they starve themselves the next day. We'll get into that. That's a bad cycle, is repeated regular body eating and activity trains your body to realize I don't need to store all this fat for a rainy day because he's going to feed me. So be consistent, but you don't need to try to measure yourself every instant. And there's different guidelines and you can look them up. But, if you're trying to lose more than 1.5 pounds of weight per week, that's too much. Now, when I start, I might measure every couple days or every week. But now if I measure my weight once a year, well, that's probably not good. And I'm preaching to myself. I am supposed to be measuring my blood pressure regularly. And I went to the doctor and I pulled up my chart. And they're like, you only have done this like once every 3 months. And they're like, you need to do this every week so we can see a trend. So I'm preaching to myself here. Sometimes I forget. So there are different measurements that I want you to take. At least get on the scale, measure your body, your circumference of your arms, and have that stored. It's nice to go back and look at success and then have a picture of where you want to be. Now, what I want to spend just a minute talking about here is body types, the form. There's 3 types of body parts where there's called ectomorph, mesomorph, and endomorph. And I like this triangle. It's a little bit hard to read here, but it talks about endomorphs, extreme mesomorphs at the ends here. So these are like bodybuilders and weightlifters. This is a sumo wrestler, and this might be a distance athlete. Now, this picture I kind of like is the ectomorphs tend to have a more rectangular shape. They're the ones that are typically tuned for distance running. I mean, watch some of the elite. That's the other thing I've done is go to like the ultra famous athletes in different disciplines and just look at them. They all kind of look the same, whether it's a distance runner or a motorcycle or a sumo wrestler or a bodybuilder or whatever, they have a very similar shape. And they are classified as ectomorphs, mesomorphs, and endomorphs. For ectomorphs, they're sort of a rectangle. Mesomorph is typically where you want the big shoulders and skinny waist, a triangle. And the endomorph is kind of the sumo wrestler. You look kind of like a big egg. So it's not that saying one's better than the other. There are different... It depends what you want to be, how do you get, I'm kind of an ectomorph, trying to be a mesomorph. That's what I was moving towards. But I knew I was more of a sprinter. So long distance running has always been difficult for me, but it doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it. I got to where I could run marathons and half marathons, but then I could do better at the sprints. So part of this is identifying, where do you want to be and where are you at? Identify your body, look at your body weight, look at your composition, look at your measurements, define where you're at on this continuum, then say, where do I want to be? And then that helps you set your plan. That helps define your macro profile. That helps define your workouts. And I'll share that here in the next couple of videos. These are things that I've learned. And to me, it's still fascinating that as you have a view of where you're going to be and you understand that no one's forcing you to eat what you eat. There's no one just jamming food in your mouth or forcing you to walk on a treadmill. You have to use like if you could step out and watch yourself in third person, you'd be like, well, they're messed up. Matter of fact, a friend of mine who was a psychologist said he would hypnotize people and have them tell them their workout plan and then play that back. So internally they knew what to do. They just externally weren't applying it. We have to break that down. You have to apply it. For me, I'll just quickly show you some of these pictures. These are my early days. Actually, these are my first days when I started. And, I would do a front, middle, and back. I'd have my wife I'd try to do it at the same time of the day, the same lighting, and then I would make these PowerPoint slides to just sort of see as I was going from kind of flab, I'd see some muscles. And then I could measure it. And it'd get me excited and give me motivation to keep going. When I was traveling all over the world, each one of these there's Norway and India and Italy and Indonesia, I was all over the place and I was losing weight. And you can kind of see from this gruffy belly over here to I was pretty fit. And, you know, that's kind of where I'm trying to get back to that. But the idea is you can measure yourself and you can do it. My body mass index, although I'm not a great fan of it, it did drop. So I could see I got from obese, where I was at, to normal. So it is doable. And then this was the skin fold test. So we had this caliper. I have a video on my YouTube channel of Steve going through the pinch test. And I can share that with you in more detail as we get into it. But I have a little spreadsheet that I enter the stuff and it spits it out. But this little caliper, usually you have to pick the points. Make sure the same person does it, the same points, and that way you can get consistent results. But you can kind of see my fat was melting away. And then I put sort of the pictures together when I was going from fit to super fit. And then I would get off season, on season between. So here was the best, you know, my best shape. But I was really working clear, you know, almost to an obsessive point of view on food composition, exercise, amount, 10 weeks. And, you know, so I was doing amazing things. And it turned out I had lots of trophies, and I did it for 8 years. So I'm glad I did that. I learned a lot, and that helped set my mind up to realize there's a connection between where you are now and where you want to be. That's what I'm getting you to try to think about, is get a clear picture of where you're at, write it down. I've got notebooks full of my starting points, and then a future self, whether you get a picture or see yourself cross the finish line or do something like that, you know. And then what we'll do is, as you learn, you start putting a plan together, which is what I talked about in the beginning. Is once you know where you're at and your goal, you have a gap. When I was in Europe, there's things that mind the gap. When the subway systems, mind the gap, don't fall in. You know, mind the gap is where are you and where are you going to go, and that's your gap. Then we will put a plan together based upon food and activity and health concerns that will start moving you. So you start thinking, is what I'm eating getting me to my goal? Is eating this worth extending my goal? You know, you have to make those calls. Activity, am I doing the activity that is going to get me to my goal? If not, there's only one person you can blame. It's you. You have to align your time chunks. We all have 24 hours a day. And you have to make your health important. You over everything else, because life's not that long and you want to have the best life possible. So once you know where you're at, where you're going, then in the next couple of chapters, we're going to lay down how do you read food, and then how do you put it all together, and then you take baby steps, and then you sustain those. So we talked about this in the preface or in the introduction, but your brain, you get to engage this machine that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, to make sure that where you're at and where you're going, and you can get a plan to get there. Health and fitness is not an accident. It's not something that just magically wakes up. It's not that I've even had that. Someone said, well, it's lucky for you, Kevin, because you're fit. And I'm like, you didn't see me when I couldn't walk up a flight of steps. You know, and I'm lifting all these crazy weights on this channel. You know, that didn't happen overnight. And I do appreciate all the concern, but I don't want to hurt myself either. But I've learned form and function, and I'm having a ball. And someone just told me today that I inspired them to lift weights. And that's like, yes, that's why we're doing this. Now, for you, for this week, start recording your starting points, your pictures, measurements, you know, wherever. Just pick something that you have access to. Record your weight, in this case, each day. What we're trying to do, earlier, remember, I asked you to record your food, your carbs, your sugar, now your weight. What I want you to start seeing is, if your weight's staying the same and your food is staying the same, then you're in what we call a balanced condition. So you have your food and your activity. We're going to record those, and then you record your weight. So those three things, if you have those, that's called we want to see your current state. What does it take in activity and food to maintain your current conditioning? Even if you're doing nothing, you know, you're eating a bag of chips and ice cream, and I want to know that, you know, yeah, that way you kind of say, all right, this is my as-is profile of the inputs to the machine. Now we ask, do those inputs align with where I want to go? And if not, then you have to make a decision. You can't keep doing what you always did and expect a different result. That's just not going to work. So put it together, get your mirrors adjusted, get your tape measures. If you want to record it in this, I mean, this is pretty simple. You know, go order it, and it has a place for your food. Has a place for, this was my son's when he did his. This was mine. Is when you would have the, you know, the summaries, you have your food, and I like writing stuff down. So like right here was an example. I'd put my food, my workouts, and so I could find my balance condition and see, okay, what can I do to move? And you know, that's what we'll get into. I also want you to realize you're on a journey. This takes time. You know, the commitment. You know, that's why I wrote, you know, had you write a note to yourself, I will do this. And now you're investing in learning. And I appreciate those that are watching the video and trying to learn. But you need to move. You need to learn to eat. You need to be able to do it in a way that will drive you towards you want to go. But if you don't know this and you don't know that, then you don't know what to do in the middle. That's my whole point. If you don't know where you're at, don't know where you're going, then how in the world are we going to devise a plan to help you get there? What I'm asking you to do today is figure out where you're at, and then where do you want to be in terms of form, function, and your health. Clear pictures. Tell some people, ask some advisors, does this make sense? You know, I can remember asking Steve, is it too late? And he said, Kevin, we can make you better or we can make you worse. If we do nothing, you'll get worse. I think we can make you better. Let's do it. And I still think that at 61, I think we can keep getting better. You know, why not? So that's what I want you to do, is get better. But give yourself a chance. It's going to take time. You didn't learn this stuff. I didn't learn it, and I'm learning it and getting to share it. Next week, or the next lesson, I'm going to put it together, will be with the food. We talked a little bit on carbs, protein, and fat, but now we're going to talk about a macro profile. How do I read the food? How do I understand proteins, fats, and carbs? I just did a live video that showed making a healthy snack. I'm going to try to do more of those. And we're starting to put the pieces together. So I hope that you're seeing that we're on a plan. We're on a trajectory. We've now done the introduction. We've done the getting started in 3 parts. We just did the build a bridge. And the next up is we're going to read food. You guys can do it. I know you can do it. I did it. And if I can do it, anybody can. You guys take care and stay tuned.